Imagine standing on the deck of a luxury yacht, the ocean stretching endlessly around you, when the people you love most push you into the freezing water with a smile. That was my son and his wife. They wanted my $3 billion fortune, and they thought the sharks would finish what they started. But when they returned home, expecting to celebrate my tragic death, they found me waiting in my favorite chair, alive, holding the one thing that could destroy them forever. This is not just a story about greed, it is about betrayal that cuts deeper than any blade, a mother's will to survive, and the shocking truth behind a network of killers hiding in plain sight. If you think family is sacred, think again. Subscribe now to Silent Lies and discover how blood can be more dangerous than water. The morning had begun so deceptively ordinary that I never could have predicted how it would end. At 67, after 6 long weeks recovering from hip replacement surgery, I was desperate for any sign that my son still cared about me. So when David called me himself, not through an assistant or lawyer, I let my heart believe he wanted to reconnect. He spoke warmly, telling me he wanted to celebrate my recovery with a small family cruise. Just the 3 of us, he said. His voice sounded sincere, almost like the boy I had raised, and I clung to that fragile hope. I dressed carefully, choosing the navy dress my late husband Robert had always loved. The one he claimed made my eyes look brighter than the sea. My taxi pulled up at the marina, and there was David, waiting at the dock with open arms. His hug felt practiced, rehearsed for an audience that was not there. Above him stood Vanessa, his wife, elegant and sharp, smiling in a way that reminded me of broken glass catching sunlight. Behind them, gleaming white and new, was the yacht, 42 feet of pure vanity. They said it was their latest purchase, but I knew in my bones it had been bought with the money I had given David to start his consulting firm. $3 million that never touched any business account. The first hour felt almost normal. Vanessa poured mimosas, speaking about house renovations, while David pointed proudly to the coastline disappearing in the distance. But even then I could sense the chill in the air, the shift beneath the surface. Their words felt rehearsed, their smiles stretched too tight. When David casually began asking about my will, about the trust, about whether I had considered simplifying the estate, I tried to brush it aside as idle curiosity. Yet I noticed Vanessa, pretending to take selfies, holding her phone at an angle that captured me in every frame. She wanted footage of me drinking, speaking loosely, perhaps looking confused. The realization made my blood run cold. It was not the first red flag. Months earlier during my recovery, they had insisted on handling my paperwork. They had brought power of attorney documents to the hospital, assuring me it was only temporary, only to ease the burden of bills. My financial advisor had grown strangely distant, my calls unanswered. Looking back, I see every sign clearly. But in that moment, I still wanted to believe my son loved me. When I asked to turn the yacht around, David's mask finally slipped. His voice hardened, colder than the Atlantic itself. He said we needed to talk about my health, my supposed memory issues. Vanessa stepped forward, claiming they had doctor's documentation of my decline. I laughed bitterly, for my mind had never been sharper. But the pieces fell together, the staged confusion at my surprise party, the medication mix-up that landed me in the hospital, the whispers behind my back. They were building a case to declare me incompetent. Then David presented the folder, documents transferring all assets into their control, papers that would strip me of everything Robert and I had built over a lifetime. He tried to mask it as protection, Vanessa filming every second as evidence that I was unstable. They wanted me to sign, smiling politely as though this betrayal was just another business deal. I refused. My voice was steady, but inside I felt the ground crumble. That was when Vanessa moved behind me, whispering in a tone both intimate and cruel, bidding me to say hello to the sharks. The push was subtle, calculated, just enough to send me off balance. I fell into the Atlantic, the freezing water engulfing me as their yacht roared away. Above the sound of the waves, I heard David shouting theatrically, as if calling out for a mother he had already buried in his mind. The cold was a knife, slicing through my lungs, my joints screaming with the ache of surgery still fresh. My shoes dragged me down, my dress billowed like an anchor. For a terrifying moment I believed this was how it would end, betrayed and drowned by the child I had given everything to. But instinct overpowered despair. I kicked off my shoes, forced my head above water, gasping for air and clinging to life. The yacht grew smaller, their silhouettes fading into distance, leaving me alone in endless blue. That was when fate intervened. Through blurred eyes I spotted a fishing boat. Rough hands pulled me aboard, strong arms belonging to Captain Jake Morrison and his grandson. They wrapped me in blankets that smelled of salt and oil, their eyes filled with questions they did not voice. Between chattering teeth, I whispered the truth. My son had tried to kill me. The horror on their faces told me they believed me instantly. Even then, soaked and shivering, I understood I could not simply return to shore and accuse David and Vanessa. They would twist the narrative, paint me as confused, a delusional widow lashing out at the family trying to help her. I needed proof, undeniable and absolute, so I begged Jake for secrecy. Let the world think I had drowned. Let my enemies celebrate victory. In death, I saw a chance to take back control. As the boat carried me toward a hidden cove, I stared back at the horizon where the yacht had vanished. My body trembled, not only from cold, but from the weight of betrayal. I had raised David with love, given him every opportunity, trusted him with everything I had, and in return, he had chosen greed over blood, a fortune over his mother's life. That wound cut deeper than the icy water ever could. But beneath the grief, something else stirred. A fire. If they wanted me gone, I would haunt them instead. I would gather my strength, find allies, and tear apart every lie they had spun. They thought they had cast me to the sharks. They had no idea the real predator had just been set free. The shock of the water lingered long after Jake and his grandson pulled me aboard their fishing vessel. My lungs burned, my teeth rattled, and every inch of my body screamed from the cold. But my mind was alive with fury, clearer than it had been in years. I sat shivering beneath the rough wool blanket Jake draped over me, replaying every moment on that yacht. My son's voice, so steady and cold. Vanessa's smile, sharp with cruelty. The gentle shove that sent me overboard. I wanted to scream, to rage, to demand why my own child had chosen betrayal over blood. Instead, I forced myself to think. If I let anger consume me, I would lose. Survival meant patience. Jake's grandson, a lanky teenager with wide, worried eyes, stared at me as though I were a ghost. "Holy hell, lady, what happened to you?" Jake silenced him with a glance but kept his gaze fixed on me. His eyes were the kind forged by storms, eyes that saw truth even when cloaked in lies. He did not need me to explain much. He already knew I was running from more than the ocean. "They tried to kill me," I whispered, my lips barely forming the words. "My own family." Jake muttered something under his breath, shaking his head. He wrapped the blanket tighter around my shoulders and guided me to a bench near the cabin. "You want me to radio the Coast Guard?" he asked, his voice steady. Panic flared in my chest. "No, not yet. Please." He studied me carefully, weighing the fear in my eyes against his instinct to follow protocol. After a long pause, he nodded once. "All right, but you need to explain." So I told him, in broken fragments between shivers, about David and Vanessa, about the money, the power of attorney, the staged signs of dementia, about the folder they had thrust in my face, demanding my signature, and the moment they decided a mother's life was worth less than $3 billion. Tyler, the boy, shifted uneasily at the wheel, his knuckles white against the controls. When I finished, Jake exhaled slowly, the lines around his mouth deepening. "I have seen storms that tear boats apart in minutes," he said. "I have seen men drown because they panicked when the water closed over them. But I have never heard of a son trying to drown his own mother for money. That is darker than any sea I have sailed." The boat rocked gently as we changed course, heading toward a small private dock far from prying eyes. Jake's decision was made. He would help me disappear, at least for now. As the coastline loomed closer, a strange calm settled over me. My old life had ended the moment I hit the Atlantic. Margaret Harrison, widow, mother, benefactor, had been swallowed by the waves. In her place was someone new, someone invisible, someone dangerous. My enemies would mourn me, bury me, and believe they had won. And while they basked in their false victory, I would be gathering strength. Jake introduced me to Mrs. Chen that evening, a formidable woman who ran a quiet bed and breakfast in a sheltered cove. She did not flinch when she saw me drenched and broken. Instead, she ladled steaming soup into a bowl and set it in front of me with a simple nod. "Eat first," she said. "Plan later." That night, wrapped in borrowed clothes and sitting at her kitchen table, I began to map my downfall and my revenge. I knew David and Vanessa would return to shore and play the part of grieving children. I imagined Vanessa's crocodile tears, David's carefully measured sorrow. They would call the authorities, file reports, and paint me as a frail, confused woman who had tragically fallen overboard. The public would pity them. The system would protect them. My obituary would be written by their lies. And yet, the thought of it did not break me. Instead, it strengthened my resolve. Death gave me freedom. If I was officially gone, I could move unseen, collect information, and strike when they least expected it. The following morning, I sat at Mrs. Chen's aging computer, my fingers trembling as I searched the news. My own obituary stared back at me from the glowing screen. Margaret Harrison, widow of the late Robert Harrison, lost at sea, beloved mother. A woman whose mind had been declining for months. My son quoted extensively, speaking of my supposed memory lapses, his concern for my well-being. Vanessa had spoken to reporters too, sobbing theatrically, her grief captured in photographs that made her appear saintly. They even requested donations to the Alzheimer's Association in my name. I clenched my fists so tightly the knuckles whitened. They were not just killing me. They were erasing me. They were rewriting my story, turning me into a pitiful shadow of the woman I was. Jake leaned over my shoulder, scanning the articles. "They are selling it well," he muttered. "Too well." I nodded. "They think they are safe now, but they forgot one thing." "What's that?" he asked. "I am still alive." The funeral was set within days. Against Mrs. Chen's advice, I went, hidden behind a maintenance shed, binoculars pressed to my eyes. I watched as people I once knew cried over an empty casket. My neighbors wept. My friends clasped David's hands in sympathy. Doctors, acquaintances, colleagues, all of them convinced I was gone. But not everyone was there. My financial advisor, my lawyer, my accountant. The absence gnawed at me. These were the people who should have been present, paying respects to a wealthy client. Instead, they were missing. And I knew why. They were part of it. I lowered the binoculars, fury simmering in my veins. This was not just betrayal by blood. This was conspiracy, carefully orchestrated, with more players than I had realized. My son and his wife were not working alone. That night I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of those who pitied my son, who believed the lie. But beneath the sorrow burned something stronger. A plan was forming, sharp and clear. If they wanted me buried, I would rise from the grave. If they wanted me silenced, I would make the world hear me louder than ever. They had thrown me to the sharks. But sharks only kill what bleeds. I was not bleeding anymore. I was sharpening my teeth. The funeral should have been my final curtain call, the end of Margaret Harrison. Yet there I was, hidden in the shadows, alive, and watching my son bury me with tears he manufactured as skillfully as an actor on stage. It was a strange thing to stand so close to your own grave and hear people speak of you as though you were gone. My neighbors whispered about my gentle smile, my kindness. My friends dabbed their eyes with handkerchiefs, genuinely mourning. And all the while, David and Vanessa basked in the attention, their grief rehearsed and flawless. I felt no sorrow, only rage. The casket, empty and polished, gleamed in the afternoon sun. Vanessa wore black, tailored to perfection, her veil trembling dramatically whenever she pretended to sob. David clasped her hand, murmuring thanks to every mourner who offered condolences. He looked somber, noble even, as though carrying the unbearable weight of loss. But I knew the truth. Behind those eyes was not grief but calculation. Every handshake was another string pulled, every tear another step closer to sealing their fortune. I adjusted the binoculars Jake had loaned me, narrowing my gaze on the crowd. The absence of certain faces confirmed my darkest suspicions. My lawyer, my accountant, my financial advisor, none of them had come to pay respects, though they had managed my affairs for decades. Their absence was no accident. They were not avoiding the funeral because of grief. They were avoiding it because they were part of the lie. I clenched the binoculars until my hands ached. If I needed proof that this conspiracy was larger than just my son and his wife, here it was. And yet seeing those missing faces gave me no comfort. Instead, I felt the crushing weight of betrayal all over again. Not only had my son chosen greed over blood, but the very people entrusted with safeguarding my legacy had joined him in the theft. The service dragged on, every word of the eulogy twisting the knife. I heard David speak about my supposed decline, about the confusion and forgetfulness that had plagued me in recent months. I wanted to scream that it was all a fabrication, a performance designed to strip me of dignity before stripping me of life. Instead, I remained hidden, silent, every word searing itself into my memory to be used later. When the crowd dispersed, Jake nudged me gently. "See what you needed to see?" he asked. His voice was low, almost reverent, as though he understood the gravity of the moment. "Yes," I whispered, my throat raw. And more than I wanted. We left before David or Vanessa could suspect an extra pair of eyes watching them. But the image of their faces, serene and untouched by guilt, stayed with me all the way back to Mrs. Chen's quiet inn. That night, unable to rest, I slipped into my old house. It had been months since I had set foot inside, but the moment the key turned in the lock, I felt the ghost of Robert's presence, the memories pressing down like dust. For a moment, I hesitated in the doorway, the urge to weep threatening to break through. But tears would do nothing now. I came for answers. The air was different inside, stale yet charged. The furniture was covered, but traces of recent life clung to every room. The refrigerator was stocked with expensive cheeses and imported fruits. The curtains had been drawn. Someone had been living here, not occasionally, but consistently. I moved through the rooms quietly, each step a reminder that this had once been my sanctuary, and now it was a stage for betrayal. It was in Robert's old study that I found the truth laid bare. Papers littered the desk, neatly stacked but damning in their detail. Legal documents, financial statements, forged reports about my health, and a chilling binder labeled simply The Margaret Project. My name, reduced to a code word. My life, dissected and plotted on paper like a business venture. Every staged incident, every photo of me looking lost, every manipulated prescription. They had orchestrated my demise meticulously, weaving a false narrative of dementia and decline. My hands trembled as I photographed the documents with the disposable camera Jake had provided. Each click of the shutter felt like reclaiming a fragment of power. But then I saw it a letter signed only with the initials MT. The words sent ice through my veins. The timeline needs to be accelerated. Margaret is asking too many questions. Phase 3 should begin within 2 weeks. Phase 3. My death. It was not my son's idea alone. Someone else had been orchestrating from the shadows. I barely had time to process it before headlights slashed across the front windows. Voices echoed at the door. Panic surged as I realized David and Vanessa were returning. My pulse thundered in my ears as I slipped through the back, clutching the camera and documents. In the garden, crouched among the rose bushes I had planted decades ago, I heard something unexpected. A baby's cry. The sound cut through the night like a blade. My heart lurched. A baby? David and Vanessa had never spoken of children. The cry was soft but insistent, the unmistakable wail of new life inside my old home. I froze, listening, every nerve alight. This was no ordinary lie. This was something bigger, darker, something that changed everything. When Jake picked me up down the street, I was shaking. "You look like you saw a ghost," he said. "Worse," I murmured. I saw my replacement. Back at Mrs. Chen's, I laid the documents out across the table. Jake's brow furrowed deeper with each page, his hands tightening into fists. "They have been planning this for over a year," he said grimly. "Every accident, every slip, every mistake you thought was yours, they staged it. They turned you into a corpse before they even tried to kill you. And now there is a baby," I whispered, staring at the evidence spread before me. "A baby whose existence makes no sense." The room fell silent as the implications settled over us. If the child was theirs, why had they hidden him? And if he was not, where had he come from? My stomach twisted as a dreadful possibility surfaced. "They needed an heir," I said slowly. "Someone to inherit after me. Someone they could present as their own." Jake looked at me with eyes that had seen storms and death but rarely cruelty of this kind. "You think they stole him?" "I think they did something," I replied, my voice steady though my soul quaked. "And whoever signed those letters, MT, is the key to finding out what." That night, I lay awake in Mrs. Chen's spare room, the weight of betrayal pressing down like the ocean's depth. My son had buried me alive. My daughter-in-law had smiled as she plotted my murder. But it was the cry of that baby echoing in my ears that haunted me most. The sound of innocence tangled in a web of greed and lies. It was no longer just about survival or revenge. It was about uncovering the truth, no matter how horrifying, and protecting a child who had already been dragged into the darkness of silent lies. The sound of that baby's cry lingered in my mind like an echo I could not escape. It haunted my thoughts as I sat in Mrs. Chen's kitchen, surrounded by the documents I had stolen from my former home. The evidence was damning enough: forged medical reports, financial projections, staged photographs of my supposed confusion. But the child's existence was something else entirely. Something more dangerous, something that shifted the entire scope of the conspiracy. David and Vanessa had never wanted children, or so they claimed. They had said their careers were too demanding, their lives too full. And yet, in my old house, I heard the unmistakable wail of an infant no more than a few weeks old. It was impossible, unless the impossible had been arranged. The next morning, Danny Crawford entered the story. Jake introduced him in the most discreet way possible. A meeting in a small office above a sandwich shop where the scent of fried onions clung to the air. Danny was sharp-eyed, older than David but younger than me, with a manner that made it clear he had spent years learning how to see what others wanted hidden. I told him everything. The attempted murder, the forged documents, the staged dementia, and finally, the child. He listened silently, occasionally scribbling notes, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back, fingers steepled. "So, you want me to follow them," he said. "Find out where the baby came from, identify this MT, and prove what they've done." "Yes," I said firmly. "I need evidence, real evidence. If I go to the authorities now, David and Vanessa will twist the truth. They will paint me as delusional. They already have the world convinced I was slipping into dementia." Danny nodded. "Then we gather proof. But you should know something. These kinds of conspiracies don't happen without professional help. If there is a mysterious MT involved, odds are you are not just dealing with greedy relatives. You are dealing with an operation." That word operation sent a shiver down my spine. Danny proved his worth quickly. Within 48 hours, he had tracked David and Vanessa's movements with precision. Photographs showed them entering banks, law offices, and most chilling of all, a medical facility outside Boston known for handling discreet surrogacy arrangements, Whitmore Reproductive Services. Danny's contact confirmed that 8 months earlier, David and Vanessa had arranged, in cash, for a surrogate to carry a child on their behalf. The arrangement had included falsified documents to make the birth certificate appear legitimate. "They bought a baby," Danny said grimly as he spread the photos across Mrs. Chen's kitchen table. "And not just any baby. They wanted a newborn who could pass as theirs biologically, and the records show the birth mother was a 17-year-old runaway named Sarah Collins. She died during delivery under circumstances that do not add up." I stared at the papers, bile rising in my throat. 17, I whispered. Just a child herself. Danny's voice hardened. "The nurse who attended the birth says Sarah was healthy, with no risk factors. She died suddenly after an injection from a woman present at the clinic. The woman's name? Miranda Torres." There it was, the signature on the documents, the initials that had haunted me. MT Miranda Torres was no shadow anymore. She was flesh and blood, a lawyer who specialized in what she euphemistically called family transition planning. In reality, she was orchestrating murders, forging documents, and selling infants to wealthy clients desperate for heirs. Mrs. Chen, who had been listening quietly, set down her teacup with trembling hands. "That woman came to the hospital once," she murmured. "Volunteering," she claimed. "Asking questions about elderly patients without families." I thought it strange at the time. I felt the blood drain from my face. She was scouting, looking for her next victim. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. David and Vanessa had not conceived a child at all. They had purchased him wrapped in the false identity of being their biological heir, and Miranda Torres had facilitated it all, ensuring that when I was declared dead, the fortune would pass smoothly into their hands, and eventually into the hands of the child they presented as their own. A perfect cover, except that I had survived. The rage that burned in me was no longer just about betrayal. It was about justice. For Sarah Collins, the girl whose life had been stolen to provide my son with an heir. For every elderly person who had died under suspicious circumstances, their assets neatly transferred to waiting families. For the truth itself, twisted into a weapon and wielded against me. Danny looked me directly in the eyes. "We can stop them, but it has to be done carefully. If Torres realizes you are alive, she will erase every trace, and she will not hesitate to make you disappear permanently." "She already tried," I said, my voice like steel, "and she failed. This time I intend to make sure she fails forever." That evening, I walked through the quiet streets of the town near Mrs. Chen's inn, the cool night air sharp against my skin. Every step felt heavier than the last. The burden of what I carried pressing down. The betrayal of my son, the death of a young girl, the corruption of lawyers and doctors who should have protected, not destroyed. I was no longer fighting for my survival. I was fighting for truth, for justice, for a child who deserved to know he was not born of greed and lies. I returned to Mrs. Chen's kitchen to find Jake waiting with the disposable camera I had filled with photographs from my break-in at the house. The images developed slowly, each one another nail in the coffin of David and Vanessa's lies. Timelines of my supposed decline, staged medical notes, financial documents, and finally, the falsified birth certificate of the child they now paraded as their son. When the last photograph emerged, Jake swore under his breath, "This is enough to bury them." "Not yet," I said, though my hands trembled as I held the evidence. "I want them to see me first. I want them to look into my eyes and know they failed." Danny raised a brow. "You want to confront them?" "Yes," I replied, "but not directly. Not yet. First, I will let them know I am alive, and then I will let the fear do the work." It was not only vengeance that drove me, though it burned hot in my veins. It was something deeper, something more dangerous. I wanted David and Vanessa to understand that the woman they had discarded, the mother they had tried to erase, was stronger than they ever imagined. They had buried me. Now I would rise like a ghost, and I would haunt them until the truth consumed every lie they had ever spoken. The first step in my resurrection was not to storm into their lives, but to whisper from the shadows. Fear can be more powerful than any weapon when it seeps into the mind of someone who believes they are untouchable. David and Vanessa thought they had erased me, buried me beneath the Atlantic, written my obituary with their own hands. They thought the world believed them. That confidence was their weakness, and I was going to exploit it. Danny helped craft the perfect message, something short, sharp, and impossible to ignore. I wrote it myself, in the same neat handwriting David had grown up seeing on every birthday card, every note tucked into his lunchbox. "Dear David and Vanessa, reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. We need to talk. Love, Mom." I added one more line as a blade to twist the knife. "P.S. Give my regards to little Robert Sarah, he is beautiful." The note was delivered by courier directly to Miranda Torres's office, while the three of them were inside finalizing paperwork to secure my fortune. At precisely 11:47 a.m., Danny watched from across the street as the envelope landed on the table in front of them. He saw their faces pale, saw Vanessa's hand tremble, saw David push back his chair as though the walls themselves had begun closing in. They bolted from the building within minutes, abandoning their carefully staged meeting. That was the moment the war truly began. While fear unraveled their composure, I turned my attention to the baby. The child was the most innocent piece of this vile puzzle, and he needed protection before Miranda or my son decided he was more liability than asset. Carol Peterson, the nurse hired to care for him, was younger than I had expected, a single mother with kind eyes that still carried the heaviness of exhaustion. When she opened the door of my former home, she looked at me as if I were a phantom stepping out of a nightmare. "You are supposed to be dead," she whispered. I smiled faintly. "Yes, I read that too. But as you can see, the reports were mistaken." Inside, I saw the baby for the first time. He lay in a bouncy seat, tiny hands curling in the air, dark hair soft against his forehead, eyes wide with a seriousness far too old for his few weeks of life. My heart clenched. He was perfect, and he was also the living proof of their crime. I sat beside him, my hands trembling as I reached out to brush his cheek. "Hello, little one," I murmured. "You deserve a better story than the one they planned for you." Carol was bewildered, frightened even, but she listened as I explained everything: the forged documents, the murdered surrogate, the conspiracy. She wept openly when I told her about Sarah Collins, the girl who had carried this child only to lose her life in the process. "So he is an orphan," Carol said softly, staring at the baby with new eyes. "Yes," I answered. "And if David and Vanessa succeed, he will grow up believing lies, never knowing his mother died to give him life." I asked Carol to become my ally, to document everything, to watch, to protect the child until I could dismantle the empire of deception surrounding him. At first she hesitated, torn between fear and responsibility, but then she nodded, determination sparking in her weary gaze. "If his real name is to carry the truth, it should be Robert Sarah Harrison," she said, honoring both the grandfather he would never meet and the young mother who had been silenced. It was perfect. While Carol cared for the baby, I prepared the stage. I returned to my former house, slipping inside as if it were a theater where I was both actor and director. I placed evidence where it would be seen: photographs, documents, recordings. I set the scene not for my destruction but for theirs. And then, when everything was ready, I chose the final flourish. The armchair, Robert had given it to me for our 20th anniversary, and it had been my favorite ever since. That was where I would sit, waiting, alive, when my son and his wife came home. The hours leading up to their arrival stretched like years. My heart pounded, but it was not fear that consumed me. It was anticipation. The door finally opened, and there they stood, carrying the weight of panic from their disastrous morning. Vanessa's scream shattered the silence as her eyes locked on me. She clutched the doorframe like a woman who had seen the devil. David froze, his keys slipping from his hand, his face drained of color. I smiled gently, savoring the moment. "Hello, darlings," I said. "How was your meeting? I hope you did not sign anything too permanent while I was away." The silence that followed was delicious. I could see the storm raging in their minds, the calculations, the disbelief. I rose slowly, holding the baby in my arms, his small body warm and real against my chest. "You tried to bury me," I told them calmly, "but you forgot that the dead do not stay quiet when the living betray them." Carol stepped out from the kitchen, her presence steady, her arms crossed as she stood ready to witness whatever would unfold. David stammered, trying to form words, but Vanessa's voice came first, high and sharp with desperation. "This is impossible. You drowned. We saw it. You cannot be here." "But I am," I said simply. "And I am not alone." I let the silence stretch until it suffocated them. I could see their panic morph into anger, denial clawing at the edges of their composure. They demanded proof that I had survived, tried to twist the narrative even then, claiming it was some trick, some madness. But I was prepared. I spread the photographs Danny had collected across the table, each image a dagger piercing their lies. Meetings with Miranda Torres, visits to the clinic, the falsified birth certificate, the forged will, every piece of evidence laid bare. Vanessa's face crumbled as she stared at the documents, her voice a whisper of fury. "Prove it in court," she hissed. "Words mean nothing without proof." I leaned closer, meeting her eyes with a cold smile. "Oh, darling, you should not have said that. Because I have proof. I have recordings. I have witnesses. And I have the truth. That is more than enough to destroy you." For the first time, David's mask cracked. He sank into a chair, his shoulders sagging, his eyes glassy with the weight of what he had done. Vanessa, however, remained rigid, her mind still searching for escape, for a way to twist the noose around my neck instead of her own. But there was no escape. The noose was theirs now, and I had pulled it tight. As the baby stirred in my arms, I pressed a kiss to his forehead. He was the only innocent in the room, the only reason I had endured, the only proof that even in the darkest webs of lies, something pure could still emerge. David and Vanessa had thought they ended me on that yacht, but what they created instead was a ghost who had risen to tear apart their empire of silent lies. The night of reckoning came faster than I expected. Once fear had seeped into their bones, David and Vanessa acted with the recklessness of cornered animals. Danny intercepted their calls and heard the word that chilled me to the core: the cleaner. They were not content with letting fear gnaw at them. They wanted me gone for good, this time with no chance of survival. A professional would handle it, someone whose talent was making accidents look natural, untraceable. They thought they could erase me a second time. They were wrong. Miss Chen, Jake, and Danny moved quickly, setting up a safe house on a secluded island. For a brief moment, I considered staying hidden, letting the law swallow them whole with the evidence we had collected. But then Danny told me the truth. The baby was also in danger. Miranda Torres had grown impatient. She considered him a loose end. A tragic house fire, a carbon monoxide leak. She would make it look inevitable. The thought of losing that child, the only innocent in this nightmare, ignited a fury in me that no ocean could extinguish. I would not allow it. If saving him meant walking into the jaws of the beast, so be it. The plan was simple, which made it terrifying. I would allow myself to be taken, let David and Vanessa believe they had triumphed, and trust that Danny and Jake would have everything in place to capture Miranda's confession. I wanted the truth laid bare, not whispered, not hidden. I wanted the entire world to hear her admit to the murders she had orchestrated, the families she had destroyed, the lies she had spun. Only then would her empire collapse. At 6 o'clock sharp, I walked up the familiar steps of my old house. David opened the door, his face pale and drawn. For a fleeting instant, I saw the boy he had once been, the child I had raised with love. Then the moment passed. His eyes flickered with fear and guilt, and I remembered the shove that sent me into the Atlantic. "Hello, David," I said softly. I am here as promised. He stepped aside, unable to meet my gaze. Vanessa was inside, pacing like a caged predator. Her composure had cracked, fury seeping through every movement. She will be here soon, she snapped. Miranda wants to speak with you personally. I smiled coldly. I am sure she does. When Miranda Torres arrived, she did not look like a killer. She looked like a lawyer arriving for a polite meeting, her leather briefcase in hand, her smile courteous, her eyes sharp and empty. She sat across from me as though this were a business negotiation. Mrs. Harrison, she said pleasantly, I am so glad you survived your boating accident. We have much to discuss. Her words dripped with poison disguised as civility. You have caused a great deal of trouble for my clients. It is time to bring this to an end. I leaned forward, unflinching. Murder concerns me, especially when it is mine. Her smile did not falter. I prefer to call it estate planning acceleration. We provide a service, helping families access wealth without years of probate battles. And for the elderly, it means peace. An end to confusion and fear. You mean death? I spat. How many? She opened her portfolio as if checking a calendar. 37. The number hung in the room like smoke. David paled. Vanessa pressed her lips together. Miranda might as well have been discussing tax returns, not lives extinguished. And you plan to make me 38? I asked. She smiled again. Actually 39. We had another matter to resolve earlier today. But yes, you will unfortunately have to suffer a more permanent accident. And the child will go with you. Old houses are so dangerous. Faulty heating, tragic leaks, devastating fires. People grieve, money transfers, life continues. My hands curled into fists. You would kill an innocent baby? The child complicates matters. Simpler to erase him now than to explain his origins later. The fury in me burned hot enough to scorch the walls, but I forced myself to remain calm, to let her talk. She was confessing, handing me every weapon I needed. I glanced toward the mantel where one of Danny's hidden recording devices sat, capturing every word. The net was tightening, and she did not even see it. That was when I smiled. Miss Torres, there is something you should know. She arched a brow. And what is that? You are under arrest. The doors burst open. Agents swarmed the room from every direction, their voices commanding, their weapons drawn. Miranda's composure finally cracked. She bolted for the kitchen, but she made it only a few steps before 3 agents pinned her to the floor. David and Vanessa sat frozen, their faces ghost white as the FBI read them their rights. Danny stepped forward, his badge gleaming. He was no longer just the private investigator I had hired. He was Agent Crawford of the FBI, and he had been hunting Miranda Torres for 2 years. We needed her to confess, he told me quietly. And you gave her the stage. The house erupted into chaos, agents collecting documents, cameras flashing, evidence secured. Carol emerged from the basement, clutching the baby protectively, her eyes wide with relief. I rushed to her side, holding Robert Sarah close, vowing silently that no one would ever threaten him again. The aftermath stretched into months. Trials, headlines, testimony. David and Vanessa pled guilty, hoping for leniency. 25 years for him, 20 for her. Miranda Torres was not so fortunate. Her arrogance in confessing had sealed her fate. She was convicted on every count: murder, conspiracy, fraud, racketeering, and sentenced to life without parole. One by one, her accomplices were unmasked. Doctors, lawyers, accountants, judges. A web of corruption dismantled piece by piece. 17 more were arrested. Dozens of suspicious deaths reopened, millions of dollars recovered. For me, the most important victory was the baby. I adopted him legally, naming him Robert Sarah Harrison. Robert for the grandfather he would never know, Sarah for the mother who gave her life for him. He grew surrounded by truth, not lies, his story written in light rather than darkness. The court supported me, Sarah's distant relatives approved, and the boy grew up knowing he was loved for who he truly was. Years passed. The pain dulled, though the scars remained. David wrote from prison, begging forgiveness, insisting he had been manipulated. I never replied. Some wounds cut too deep, and some betrayals cannot be undone. Instead, I poured my energy into Robert Sarah, into raising him to know that family is not about blood or inheritance, but about love and loyalty. As I look back now, I see the week I was declared dead as the turning point of my life. In those days, I lost everything I thought I knew. I lost my son, my home, my identity, but I gained something stronger. I gained clarity. I learned that greed can corrupt even the people we love most, that lies can destroy legacies, but also that truth can survive if someone is willing to fight for it. They tried to throw me to the sharks. Instead, I became one. When I look back at everything that happened, it feels like I lived through two different lives. In the first, I was a mother who believed in family, who thought love and blood were unbreakable bonds. In the second, I became a woman who had to rise from the grave to learn that sometimes those bonds are nothing but shackles made of lies. I lost my son the moment he chose greed over me. I lost my daughter-in-law when she smiled as she shoved me into the ocean. And yet, in losing them, I discovered a truth far stronger than money, stronger than blood, stronger than fear. That truth was this: family is not measured by inheritance or obligation. Family is the people who protect you when the world tries to drown you. Family is the strangers who become saviors, the allies who risk their safety for yours, the child who deserves to grow up surrounded by honesty instead of deceit. Jake pulled me from the waves when my own son left me to die. Mrs. Chen gave me shelter when the world thought I was gone. Danny showed me that justice was not just an idea but a sword that could cut through even the darkest lies. And Carol reminded me that compassion still exists, that love for a child can inspire courage even in the face of danger. These people were not bound to me by blood, but they became my true family. I survived betrayal. I survived attempted murder. I survived the erasure of my identity, and in surviving I gained something my son and his wife never understood: freedom. Freedom to speak the truth. Freedom to protect the innocent. Freedom to choose who deserves a place at my table and who deserves nothing but the weight of their own guilt. The empire of lies they tried to build collapsed under the weight of its own greed. Miranda Torres and her network will spend the rest of their lives behind bars. David and Vanessa will never again taste the luxury they craved. And I, the woman they tried to erase, stand alive, stronger and unbroken. Today, I do not mourn what I lost. Instead, I celebrate what I gained. A grandson who carries both the name of his grandfather and the name of his young mother. A boy who will grow up knowing that his life began in tragedy but was reclaimed in truth. He will never be raised on lies. He will know that his family did not abandon him to greed, but fought to protect him from it. And through him, Sarah Collins's sacrifice will never be forgotten. This story is not just mine. It belongs to every person who has been betrayed by the ones they trusted most. It belongs to anyone who has been told that blood is thicker than water, only to discover that blood can be poisoned by greed. If you hear my voice, know this: you are not alone. There is strength in survival, there is power in truth, and there is always hope, even when the world tries to bury you. Thank you for listening. If you believe that lies should be exposed, that truth deserves to be told, and that no betrayal should remain hidden in the dark, then subscribe to Silent Lies. More stories wait in the shadows, and together we will bring them into the light.